But what's remarkable is that my country, the United States of America, has now emerged as the global leader in reforming cannabis laws. I have spent my professional life apologizing for my country whenever I speak outside the country. And now I actually have something to feel good about. In the United States, 16 states have now legalized medical marijuana. And Washington, D.C., our capital territory. 16. There are roughly 1 million people now who have a legal medical marijuana ID card from the government or letter from a doctor. Right? There are more medical cannabis dispensaries operating above ground, visible, that can be visited by the police than there are coffee shops in the Netherlands. Right? Public support for the legalization of medical marijuana is roughly 70%. Right? With respect to the full legalization of marijuana, in California, the legalization initiative last fall, it got 46.5% of the vote. People saying to me, how come it didn't win? And I'm looking at them, are you crazy? A year before that, nobody would have imagined we had a chance, right? Every year we have a polling organization called Gallup Poll, the most famous American public opinion polling organization. For many years, for 40 years, they've been asking, do you favor legalizing marijuana use? In 2006, 36% said yes, and that was the highest ever. 60% said no. Last November, so 5 years later, from 2006 to 2011, same question. The 36% in favor of legalizing marijuana had become 50%. The 60% opposed had become 46%. 14-point increase in support, 14-point decrease in opposition, 28-point swing in public opinion, a more dramatic swing in public opinion on legalizing marijuana than we had seen on the transition on gay marriage between 2006 and 2010. I mean, gay marriage now has more politicians saying it, but on a public opinion level, right? There will be this year, this November, in Washington and Colorado, ballot initiatives to legalize marijuana, to treat it like alcohol. In both states, there's more people currently in favor than against. In both states, it will still be hard to win, because as you get close to election day, people who are ambivalent tend to vote no, not yes. But by 2016, 4 years from now, I'm pretty sure that we're going to do it. So the United States now, not at the level of the federal government, but at the level of civil society, public opinion, and state government, has emerged as a global leader in cannabis reform and cannabis regulation. Right? I mean, it's remarkable. I mean, you have in Spain, you have in Copenhagen, you have in, in parts of Switzerland, other experimentations of talk about legal regulation, but we're really doing it. We're really bringing it above ground in a way, And the way I think about this as a strategist is, it's like a pincer move on the federal government. The target has to be the federal government. This is the last place that will change. On controversial social issues, change always comes first from the level of the states and local, and eventually the federal government's the last place to change, right? The federal government is holding firm to some extent on the drug war. Obama made some modest reforms, but mostly holding firm. And the federal government is also still the #1 protagonist of the drug war. The Russians are nastier and meaner, but we're bigger and more powerful, right? This is the target. The two major forces coming to bear. I mean, the Europeans were sort of been moving a bit, especially in international circles. A few years ago, for the first time ever, the Europeans allied with others to reject a Bush administration anti-harm reduction thing. So for the first time, harm reduction got in there. So the Europeans are trying to get it together, but inevitably the Swedes or somebody messes up the consensus, right? But the Europeans are introducing a new energy, but Europe has lost some of its momentum for leadership on this issue in recent years. And please, Europe needs to regain that, right? In Latin America, what's happening is public opinion in Latin America still is not so supportive of reform. You know, many Latin Americans, if you say legalize or something, they think that means legalize the narco lords. It means put them in charge. They don't understand that if you make the drugs legal, that the narcos will not have the competitive advantage anymore. It'll probably be taken over by major corporations, but not the narcos. But at the level of the elites, at the level of the diplomatic, political, business, cultural, media elites, that's where it's going to affect the American elites. The more American elites at that level are, because they're hearing it now all the time. 3 weeks ago, you know the meeting, the Davos World Economic Forum, they have regional meetings. I went to the meeting in Mexico, Puerto Vallarta, the Latin American meeting 3 weeks ago. And there was a session on drugs with me and the State Department drug guy and the Mexican. And this is the most important gathering of businessmen in Latin America. Otto Perez Molina is on the opening plenary with Calderon and the Prime Minister of Spain, and he just says it. And what's happening is the conventional wisdom among educated elites is shifting. It's shifting in an important way now. So that's going to shape the American thinking at the elite level. And then from the level of civil society, especially on the marijuana issue, you have this welling up, beginning to push back. In both cases, the hardest transition, in the United States, by our American Constitution, federal law is supreme. The federal law can always overwhelms the state law. So managing that conflict between federal law and local law, between federal policy, is going to be the major challenge. And on the international front, managing the tension between the global prohibition regime and the international conventions and all the countries trying to experiment with new policies, that also is going to be the major tension. In Europe, when European governments want to push forward on needle exchange, heroin maintenance, safe injection rooms, medical marijuana, and the UN INCB, the UN Narcotics Control Board, says that violates the convention, the European governments say, we have our own lawyers, and they say it doesn't. Right? The Europeans say to the UN, you have your lawyers, we have our lawyers, sorry. In the developing world, when the UN lawyers say that, in Latin America and Africa, they should go, oh, okay. But they don't say, like the Europeans do, we have our lawyers too. So that tension between federal law in the US and local law, and on the international front between the international conventions and national law, those are the two principal tensions that I see from the United States strategically over the next decade. So all of this is about saying this is a multi-generational struggle for a different way of dealing with drugs. When I was talking with Nils yesterday and he was explaining his friend, and I realized it's the same mode, it's the same way of thinking. It is that when you are dealing really with all sorts of crime, but most especially with types of criminality that are not naturally crime, they're not even in the Bible, that are sort of modern creations, that the state and all of us have a moral obligation to reduce the role of coercion to the maximum extent possible while still protecting the health and safety of the citizens. That's the objective. It's not necessarily the libertarian legalize all, but it is to say that in this area we must be innovative, we must take risks, but that the moral imperative must be to reduce the role of criminal law, of criminalization, and of coercion, period, in dealing with this problem to the maximum extent consistent with protecting the health and safety of our society.